Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive, where we, try to unpack these really complex topics and boil them down to the good stuff, the really crucial insights. Today, we're going deep on this idea of the men who whispered to leaders. Sounds kind of cloak and dagger, right? But seriously, we've got some fascinating material here that suggests there's this whole hidden dimension to how decisions really get made in organizations, kind of like this invisible network of influence.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Think of it like an iceberg. You see the tip, the formal structures, the titles, the official pronouncements.
Right, right.
But what's really driving things, the stuff that makes or breaks an organization, is often happening below the surface. Our sources call this the invisible terrain.
The invisible terrain. I like that. So who are these men who whispered to leaders? Like, are we talking about actual whispers in dimly lit hallways?
Well, not always literally whispering, of course. But the idea is there are these individuals, these whisperers, who understand how to read this invisible terrain. They pick up on the subtle cues, the unspoken dynamics, the things that formal reports and data just don't capture.
Okay, so it's more about having this, like, sixth sense for organizational dynamics.
Precisely. And interestingly, our sources connect this to the concept of human intelligence.
Humint, like spy stuff.
Yeah, originally Humint was all about gathering intelligence in the world of espionage, using human sources.
Right.
But what we're seeing now is that those same principles, reading people, understanding motivations, tapping into informal networks, are proving incredibly valuable in a business context.
So these whisperers are like the corporate version of intelligence operatives.
In a way, yeah. But instead of uncovering state secrets, they're decoding the subtle signals of the organizational landscape, the stuff that really influences how decisions get made, and ultimately whether an organization thrives or dives.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So how does this organizational humint actually work? What are these whisperers doing?
Well, the material we've been looking at talks about listening to the invisible, decoding the unsaid, mapping thought patterns, and anticipating events by mastering the 5 elements of the grammar of intelligence.
5 elements of the grammar of intelligence. That sounds a bit academic.
Yeah, it's a framework. Think of it like a mental model that helps these whisperers analyze and make sense of the information they gather. Like one element is source credibility. It's about understanding who's providing the information and what their biases might be.
Makes sense. You can't just take everything at face value.
Right. Another key element is plausibility. Does the information make sense in the context of what you already know? Does it fit with the bigger picture?
So it's about connecting the dots, seeing the patterns.
Exactly.
Our material also talks about these whisperers being really skilled at picking up on weak signals. What does that look like in practice?
Well, imagine you're in a meeting, right? And there's this executive who's usually super vocal, always contributing, but suddenly they're silent. Or maybe you notice that certain individuals consistently get left out of those informal gatherings, the coffee breaks, the after-work drinks.
Right, those little side conversations where things really get hashed out.
Exactly. Those are weak signals. They're these subtle hints that something might be off, that there might be underlying tensions or shifting alliances. A skilled whisperer notices these things long before they blow up into a full-blown crisis.
So it's about being hyper aware of the unspoken dynamics, the body language, the things that aren't explicitly stated.
Yes, and it's not just about passive observation. The material also emphasizes asking the right questions, especially, in those situations where consensus might be misleading.
Oh, I've definitely been in those meetings where everyone's nodding along, but you can just feel that something's not quite right.
Yeah, sometimes consensus is more about, like, going along to get along. People might agree publicly because they don't want to rock the boat or maybe they feel pressured. But underneath, there could be a whole lot of disagreement or doubt. The whisperer knows how to kind of gently probe those situations and uncover the real feelings.
Interesting. So there are organizational therapists in a way.
In a sense, yeah.
Yeah.
They're helping to surface those hidden tensions and bring things out of the open where they can be addressed.
The material also talks about identifying the true friction point within a system, which, can be tricky. It's not always obvious, right?
Yeah, it's like, think of a car engine that's making a weird noise.
Okay.
You might see smoke coming from one part, but the actual problem, the source of the friction, could be somewhere else entirely.
Right. It's not always where you'd initially think.
Exactly. And it's the same in organizations. Often, the focus is on dealing with the most obvious symptoms, the things that are causing the most immediate pain. But a whisperer tries to dig deeper. to find the root cause, the fundamental misalignment, the broken relationship that's really driving the problem.
And that takes a certain kind of skill set, right? It's not just about being analytical, it's also about being like emotionally intelligent, being able to read people and understand their motivations.
Absolutely. And here's another key point. The source emphasizes that human doesn't try to convince, it observes.
That's interesting. It's almost a counterintuitive approach in a business world that's so often about, persuasion and pushing your agenda.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes humans so powerful. It's not about imposing your will. It's about really understanding the existing ecosystem, the power dynamics, the unspoken rules, the individual motivations. By deeply observing how people actually interact, where the real influence lies, you gain this much more accurate and nuanced picture of what's going on.
And that understanding, as you were saying earlier, helps to connect the dots, to map out the real power structures, which, as anyone who's worked in an organization knows, aren't always reflected in the official org chart.
Oh, absolutely. The org chart tells you who reports to whom on paper, but it doesn't tell you who really gets things done.
Right.
Who has the ear of the CEO, who can sway opinions, who can make things happen. There might be, individuals with these vast informal networks, these deep-seated loyalties, or maybe they just have this unique expertise that gives them a lot of clout behind the scenes.
And finding those people, figuring out who those key influencers are, that's a big part of what Humint is all about.
Yeah, it's about understanding how influence really flows in an organization, who the real decision makers are, and how they operate. And sometimes, it's not the people with the fanciest titles or the biggest offices.
Our source material has this really great example about a company preparing for a sale or a merger. And it points out how even something as seemingly insignificant as a silence, a quiet withdrawal, or an unspoken pact can be a huge red flag in those situations.
Right. Mergers and acquisitions, those are high-stakes times for organizations, and people are often really nervous. They might not feel comfortable voicing their concerns directly because, they're worried about their jobs.
Makes sense.
So they might express their unease in more subtle ways, like a usually enthusiastic executive suddenly clams up.
Right.
Or a key team starts quietly withdrawing their support for a particular integration plan.
Those are the kind of things a whisperer would pick up on.
Exactly. Those seemingly small signals can actually be major indicators that something's not right, that there are deeper issues that need to be addressed.
It's fascinating. It's almost like they're reading the organizational tea leaves or something, right?
Yeah, I like that analogy.
And it's not just about focusing on the usual suspects, the people at the top, right?
Yeah.
The material talks about the importance of paying attention to peripheral profiles, those folks who are a bit more discreet, maybe even disconnected from the main action.
Yes. And those individuals can be incredibly valuable sources of information precisely because they're not seen as central players. People might be more willing to confide in them, to share their unfiltered opinions because they don't feel like they're talking to someone in a position of power.
They're kind of like the invisible nodes in the network. They might not be the most obvious, but they have these crucial connections.
Exactly.
And the overall approach of Humint is described as low profile, high density, focusing on these subtle layers of influence. It's not about making a big splash, is it?
No, it's much more about operating with this kind of quiet effectiveness. The whisperers, they immerse themselves in the culture, they listen, they observe, and they try to influence things from within, often by providing these really timely but discreet insights to leaders. It's not about disrupting things. It's about understanding how the system works and then, maybe nudging it in a more productive direction.
So subtle influence rather than like a top-down command and control approach.
Yeah, much more nuanced. And what else is interesting? The source material talks about how Humint can also leverage executive search, strategic recruitment, to shape the dynamics of an organization.
Oh, that's a really interesting angle. So it's not just about understanding the current landscape, it's also about strategically introducing new elements into the system.
Yeah, and I think this gets to the heart of what Humint is really all about. It's this deep understanding of human behavior, of how people interact, of how power works in organizations. And sometimes that understanding reveals that the organization needs a different kind of leader, someone who can come in and shift the balance, shake things up a bit, or maybe just provide a fresh perspective.
So they're using executive search not just to fill a role, but to intentionally change the energy, the dynamics of the team.
Right. And I think that's a really powerful idea.
Yeah.
It's not just about finding someone with the right skills on paper. It's about finding someone who can really make a difference, who can help the organization navigate those choppy waters.
It really seems like human is more than just a set of techniques. It's like a whole way of thinking, a discipline.
I agree. The source material actually uses the phrase capacity to navigate the fog, which I think is a perfect way to describe it.
Because organizations can be pretty foggy places, right? There's all this complexity, all this ambiguity, and it's hard to see the path forward sometimes.
Exactly. And, data and algorithms can only take you so far. They're great for analyzing the hard numbers, but they don't always capture the human element, the emotions, the politics, the unspoken dynamics that really drive decision-making.
And that's where Humint comes in. It's that human layer of understanding that helps to make sense of the fog.
Right. It's about acknowledging that decisions aren't always made based on pure logic or data.
Yeah.
They're influenced by relationships, by fears, by loyalties, by all those messy human things.
One of the key takeaways from the material is this idea that critical decisions often happen, off the record in the backstage of power, as they call it.
Yes, and I think that's so true. The formal meetings, the official pronouncements, those are important, but a lot of the real action happens in those informal conversations. Maybe over dinner or on the golf course or even just in those quick hallway chats.
The places where people let their guard down a little bit.
Exactly. And that's where the whisperers really excel. They know how to access those informal channels, how to be present in those moments where decisions are actually being made.
And those invisible pathways, the informal networks, they form what the source calls these underground networks of power, fear, or allegiance. It's like there's this whole hidden world operating beneath the surface of the organization.
Right. And it's the role of these whisperers, applying these human principles to map out those networks, to figure out how information and influence really flow. Who are the key players? What are their motivations? What are the unspoken rules?
It's like they're creating a secret map of the organization.
Yeah, but it's not about being sneaky or manipulative. It's about having this deeper understanding of how things actually work.
And finally, the material talks about this idea of the inflection point, the moment where, like, a seemingly small thing, a whispered aside, a deliberate silence, even someone's repeated absence, can tip the scales and completely change the direction of an organization.
Yes. And those moments, those inflection points, they can be really hard to spot. But for someone who's attuned to the subtle signals, they can be incredibly revealing. They can tell you a lot about the underlying dynamics, the power struggles, the shifting allegiances.
It's like being able to anticipate the earthquake before the ground starts shaking.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up here, I think the big takeaway is that there's this whole, human dimension to power and influence that we often overlook.
Absolutely.
And that there are these individuals out there, these whisperers, who are really skilled at navigating this complex, often invisible terrain. They're the ones who can help leaders see what's really going on and make better decisions.
Yes. And I think for all of us, whether we're in leadership positions or not, understanding this concept of human, of paying attention to those subtle cues, of reading between the lines can be incredibly valuable. It can help us make sense of our own organizations, navigate those tricky situations, and maybe even become a little bit more influential ourselves.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. Really makes you think about who the whisperers might be in your own world, and maybe even what kind of whispers you're sending out yourself.
Absolutely.
Food for thought. Thanks for joining me.
It was a pleasure.
And for all you deep divers out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep listening for those whispers.